Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, June 25th, 1913, the first of over 50,000 veterans begin returning to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania for the largest reunion of Civil War soldiers. It's a multi-day event taking place on the battlefield itself, full of speeches and reunions and camping and plenty of revisionist history. A lot of it centered around the so-called lost cause mythology that the South had fought justly and heroically. So, here to discuss the Great Reunion of 1913 and how history gets reworked in real time is, as always, Nicole of Columbia. Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Jody.
And back for episode 2 of a 3-episode run is Jane Coaston of Vox and the Weeds and lots more. Hello, Jane.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
So this Great Reunion, 1913, everyone gathered back at Gettysburg. Nikki, what was the goal here? Was it get together and swap stories, or was there kind of a larger historical reckoning going on?
I mean, there was a huge historical reckoning going on. Here you had a nation that had been riven by civil war, and now you're coming back to the battlefield years later and having certain people who were engaged in that fight coming back. You have United States soldiers meeting with Confederate soldiers in a kind of healing ceremony of a sort. And we'll get into the complicated nature of that healing. But it was about this moment of overcoming the divisions of the Civil War. That was a big goal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what you see in this moment is how effective lost cause mythology in some ways became, because you can see that this is a moment in which what the war was fought over is not discussed. Yeah. The fact that the war was fought, but that people can still come together, even if one person gets in a fight because he uses a vile epithet for Abraham Lincoln. You have this idea that no matter what the war was about, which we won't discuss, and no African Americans will speak at this event, we're over it now and everyone is friends again. And I think that symbolism was so important. It was almost more important than the event taking place.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that the healing was going to be about making this moment about we all fought honorably. We all fought with valor. No matter what side you were on, you were an honorable soldier. And that is of a piece with the lost cause mythology that had been building not only through the South, but across the rest of the country among white Americans and was being memorialized. I mean, this is the moment at which a lot of those Confederate statues that are coming down now were going up in sort of a testament or celebration of that very idea that we were all valorous soldiers fighting as Americans.
It kind of makes me think of something we talked about last episode, which is, there's all these different ways people conceive of racism as a sort of personal fault or something more systemic. And here it's like, well, what is healing, right? Is healing go shake the hands with the person you stood across from during a war, or is healing a larger reckoning with something more systemic and something deeper? Do you think there was any scenario in which the country in 1913 was in a position to do an actual sort of deeper systemic healing and reckoning?
Absolutely not. I think that especially I'm struck by the presence of Woodrow Wilson, perhaps one of our more racist presidents. Woodrow Wilson's reunion address, he talks about, our battles long past, the quarrel forgotten, except that we shall not forget the splendid valor. which is certainly his perspective because this is someone who hosted a screening of Birth of a Nation in the White House and helped resegregate the federal workforce. They're very much of a sense, it's like, whatever this war was actually over, which is the subject of slavery, we don't have to talk about it. We just remember the valor, and we work as hard as possible to push African Americans and the African American experience of the Civil War out of not just this conversation, but out of public life altogether.
Right. And this reunion is happening, remember, after the very successful political project of Jim Crow, right? This isn't happening in the 1870s during this period of Reconstruction when African American rights are being protected and when there are African American legislators. This is happening in 1913 after African Americans have been denied the right to vote, have been reinscribed as second-class citizens, both economically and politically. And you almost need, that's the predicate on which this healing is built.
Yeah. Some other tidbits that I think reflect what you're getting at. Wilson spoke. Not that many veterans were invited to speak, but none of those who were African American. And then, no nurses or civilians even were given a chance to tell their story there. I think it shows just a very sort of narrow conception of what this war was, which was, some white folks from the North and some white folks from the South got in the field and sort of scuffled with each other. And here we are kind of playing nice. I don't know. One other thing, I'll just throw it out there. It was incredibly hot at this time. And, at some basic logistical level, the idea of getting a bunch of people in their 70s to go back out into a field and spend like 3-4 days in incredible heat, living back in tents and sort of recreating the misery of the time doesn't strike me as the best idea.
Right. This sounds to me tremendously unpleasant. The first couple of days, the temperatures are around 100 degrees. And the number of people who actually apparently had heat exhaustion, according to the U.S. Army's chief surgeon, was just about 320 people, which to me is actually quite low, considering that the mean age of the veterans present is 72 years old. And this is being 72 in 1913, which is not a tip-top time to be an elderly person in an area where sanitation may not be that great, especially because you're in a camping environment. They've got 156,000 pounds of meat. They've got canned fish. They've got thousands of dozens of eggs. And I just keep thinking, it's so warm. It's so warm. And it just must have been, I understand the point, but just the smell to me would have been displeasing.
Nikki, is there a subdiscipline of history that is just focused on smell? Because I feel like you could just do that at every era.
Sanitation history is low-key
history.
One of my side passions. I will always talk about the great stink of the Thames in the late 19th century, which was a smell that apparently was, the way that historians have put it some ways, makes it sound like it was a smell that caused cholera, which is not how cholera works. But apparently, the two things were interlinked. And it was, there is I stand up for the olfactory history genre.
I think that it's important. Look, there is kind of a history of the senses, but I think it is important to bring back that kind of tactile experience of how unpleasant this must have been. And then you layer that onto the fact that for some of these guys, they're reliving probably the most traumatic moment of their life. It seems so incredibly unpleasant on so many different levels, but it was doing what for the white people gathered was really important political work.
Right.
As we start to wrap up, we're having a conversation right now, obviously, about the way we remember the Confederacy, and this was the time in which a lot of those memories were consecrated. Is the conversation we're having now about the Civil War and the aftermath of the Civil War, or is it actually about this era and the way we remembered the Civil War 50 years later?
I think that the conversation we're having now is more about memory and more about how that memory has been posited and very successfully reshaped. I'm fascinated by the criminal justice system. I write a lot about criminal justice reform. And one of the challenges that is inherent to our criminal justice system is the importance of witness testimony. Despite the fact that witnesses, what you think you saw when something happened can be reshaped and reshaped and reshaped, and you might not even know it's happening. And I think about that a lot with historical moments like the Civil War, where it becomes an overarching story about something based on whom is telling the story or who is permitted to tell the story. And only now, only relatively recently, are we starting to retell the story in a way that includes more of the people involved, in a way that gets away from Woodrow Wilson's interpretation of events that, who knows what we were fighting over, but we all fought with valor, and returns to the actual subject at hand.
Yeah, and if we think about this reunion in 1913, it was about exactly that. It was about memory and how we remember this war. And this whole period was about coming up with an interpretation of this war and a set of memories about this war that have shaped many Americans' view of what the Civil War was about and what it meant and how we should memorialize it.
And as I have said, I think when we've talked about the Civil War before, as a reminder that this is not long gone memory. I mean, there were obviously reunions and anniversaries and marches regarding the Civil War with Civil War veterans well into the 20s and 30s. I think I've mentioned on the show before that my grandmother has memories of seeing Civil War veterans marching in Philadelphia. And so this is just not that, it's not that long ago at all.
Right. We're still, I think it may have just been last month that the last person receiving a Civil War pension passed away. Yeah. I think that especially because generational trauma does not require people from the generation that endured that trauma to still be around, especially because what the stories they told about those events, the story, survivors of Andersonville would have told their descendants, or the people who survived the Battle of Gettysburg, or who were present at those early battles when the story the Union told itself was that, we'll get this done, and while we get this done, people can come and watch. And, it's because it's a quick trip from D.C. I think that the generational memory will continue to far outlast the war itself.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we will leave it there. Jane Coaston of Vox, thank you as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you'll be back for one more episode after this. And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX. You can find out lots more, including how to suggest a topic at thisdaypod.com. I will also say on our website there are ways to support us directly and get in touch if you want to advertise on the show. Lots of stuff on the site. You can also email us at thisdaypod@gmail.com. Email questions about the show, stuff we screwed up, stuff you'd like to see. We're here. We're checking our inbox. We will respond. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Next episode, one more with Jane Coaston. We're going to talk about a newspaper strike from a very different media environment than the one we're living in right now. That's next Tuesday. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.